South America. And there you see Dragon during its final couple of hours attached to the International Space Station there on the space station's Harmony node. There on the far left-hand side is the European Columbus laboratory. Just out of view is the Japanese Kibo laboratory, and there at the bottom right-hand side is the U.S. Destiny laboratory with the space station's solar arrays back there in the background. As we mentioned, the bolts are being released in between Dragon and the International Space Station. The next major step will be to begin the process of backing Dragon away from the orbiting complex. That is going to be done via ground command. It's a little bit different than what was done back the early part of this month whenever Dragon arrived at the station. The crew was at the controls for the majority of all the different arm operations that were done, but the ground teams here in Houston are going to be sending the command to automatically move the station's 58-foot-long robotic arm that is currently already attached to Dragon to back the spacecraft away from the orbiting complex, and then the crew will take over at that point in time. The go for release of Dragon should take place around 8:21 a.m. Central Time, a little more than 2 hours from now. At that point, Dragon will be released. It'll be flying by itself. It will conduct the first of its planned back-away maneuvers, firing its jets 1 minute later. And then there'll be a series of burns that will take place soon after that will take Dragon away from the space station complex. It'll cross out of what's called the keep-out sphere, which is an imaginary circle drawn around the station that spacecraft must keep away from. And then it will cross what's known as the approach ellipsoid, which is a wider circle, soon after that as well. And then Dragon will be on its way. That first departure burn should take place at 8:27. The second departure burn a couple of minutes later at 8:29. Dragon will have what's known as a yaw maneuver. It'll spin around basically at 8:35. It'll have another departure burn at 8:36. It'll cross that imaginary circle that we call the keep-out sphere at 8:36 as well. And then it'll cross the approach ellipsoid at 8:39. So all of this, once Dragon gets released, happens fairly rapidly. Dragon's deorbit burn is scheduled for today at 1:28 p.m. Central Time. That is 11:28 a.m. in California. The trunk that you see there at the bottom that has the solar arrays attached to it will be jettisoned at 1:41. Entry interface for Dragon will take place at 1:43. Its drogue chutes will be deployed at 2:11. The main chutes a minute later at 2:12. And then Dragon is currently scheduled to splash down about 250 miles off the coast of California at 2:20 later on today. Now, note about our programming here on NASA television. We will not have live coverage of Dragon's re-entry and splashdown today due to the fact that we don't have any video assets in the air that are tracking the spacecraft. So confirmation of Dragon's successful deorbit burn and its splashdown in the Pacific Ocean will be provided by SpaceX as they watch over their spacecraft as it comes back in. Updates will be available on the SpaceX website at spacex.com and also on the NASA website at www.nasa.gov and nasa.gov/station. So pay attention to those two websites for confirmation of this afternoon's activities. But we'll stay with you today until Dragon departs the space station until we don't see it any longer. We should have some pretty good views of the spacecraft as it backs away and continues on toward its re-entry later on today. There's a live look inside SpaceX's Mission Control Center there in Hawthorne, California. Obviously a very busy day for this team there, and quite a milestone for this team as they watch this end of the first commercial resupply mission that this company has flown. Of course, they've had test flights before, including one back in May up to the International Space Station, but this is the first one that was done under the Commercial Resupply Services contract. So SpaceX now officially joins the other cargo providers up to the International Space Station. The Russians have their Progress vehicle that fly up to the station several times a year, the next one coming up on October 31st. The Japanese have their HTV spacecraft that flies basically once a year, docks to the same place that SpaceX's Dragon is currently attached to, the bottom side of Harmony. And the Europeans have their automated transfer vehicle that flies up several tons of supplies and rendezvous and docks with the Russian segment of the International Space Station, and now the first commercial company, SpaceX, providing missions as well.
Thanks for the tag up, Sonny.
And confirmation from both the crew and the ground teams here that all of the bolts on the Dragon spacecraft and the International Space Station have been loosened. The crew's been working this since before we came on the air this morning, watching over the systems as these bolts are automatically driven by ground teams. They had quite a bit of last-minute packing to do. That was done on Saturday. There's a lot of what they call cold bags inside Dragon. One of the biggest things that Dragon gives NASA and its international partners is the ability to return cargo back to Earth. In some ways, that is almost more important than the actual delivery of the cargo, because SpaceX is the only vehicle that can return a significant amount of cargo and scientific research back to Earth. Of course, this orbiting laboratory is a huge research facility, and getting these samples back to Earth so that the different scientists and researchers can take a look at them is of critical importance. We've not had this capability since the retirement of the space shuttles last year, so there's quite a number of samples on board Dragon that are getting ready to come back home later on today. There's a look at Aki Hoshide and Sonny Williams. Yesterday, as they were finishing up some of the final packing of Dragon, you get a sense of the inside of that spacecraft. You see all the different cargo strapped down there. There is some frozen samples that are put inside a glacier. Glacier is basically a big footlocker that is powered up and is kept at a very cold temperature. All those frozen samples are stored in there, and that is going to be part of the early destow cargo that's going to take place. They're actually going to remove that glacier and some of the other supplies right after Dragon splashes down. So that'll be removed, kept in sort of a powered container, and brought on a fast boat back to the docks where SpaceX's Dragon will ultimately come, but the cargo is going to come back a little bit before the spacecraft. The remainder of the cargo that's inside Dragon will actually come back inside the cargo craft itself. Once Dragon gets back to the docks there near Long Beach, California, they'll do some stabilization of the spacecraft, and then it's going to be trucked to McGregor, Texas, which is where SpaceX has a facility. And then the spacecraft will be processed there, as well as the remainder of the cargo that was not returned early. Again, this is some footage from yesterday as Sonny Williams and Aki Hoshide packed some final items inside the Dragon spacecraft. This is before they shut the hatches. But they spent the better part of their morning packing this spacecraft full of the remainder of the items that are coming home. Dragon took up 882 pounds of supplies. The crew made quick work of removing all of that soon after Dragon docked with the space station. It's actually taking home about twice that amount of supplies. It's bringing home 1,673 pounds of cargo, including 163 pounds of crew supplies, 866 pounds of scientific research, the final portions of which Sonny and Aki were packing there, as you see from the video from yesterday, and 518 pounds of hardware. So close to a ton of supplies coming home later on today back to Earth. They exited Dragon around 10:15 a.m. Central Time yesterday. This was Saturday, and then they closed the hatches at about 11 a.m. Central Time. And they have spent the time since then and in the early part of today finishing up what they call a vestibule configuration. That is basically just the common area in between Dragon and the space station. They depressurized that so that the hatches once they were closed, they could take care of that and also begin the process of actually demating Dragon and undoing these bolts, which they just wrapped up a few minutes ago. That is a look at Brazil from 263 miles above. This team here in Houston is continuing to monitor the progress as the Dragon team in Hawthorne, California works through all these procedures, getting ready for the actual demating of Dragon from the space station coming up here after the 8 o'clock hour, so about another 2 hours from now. It's been a very busy time for the International Space Station with the arrival of Dragon and all the work their crew had to do. There's a brand new set of crew members up on board with Kevin Ford, Evgeny Tarelkin, and Oleg Novitsky arriving this week. Of course, they've got the activity today. The Progress 49 is going to be heading up to the space station at the end of the month on October 31st. As we speak and as we bring you this coverage live on the air, that rocket is being mated down at the Baikonur Cosmodrome. It's going to roll out tomorrow, head out to what is known as Site 1. That is the typical launch pad for both Progress and Soyuz vehicles. And it will be bringing up about 2.5 tons of supplies to the International Space Station. Then there's a spacewalk coming up 1 day later on November 1st, where Sonny Williams and Aki Hoshide will venture outside to the P6, that is the port or left-hand side of the space station. These big solar panels that you see there on the far right-hand side have radiators that are very close to them that ammonia is flowed through to keep all the different systems cool and in proper working order. There's always been a small leak on one of those radiators, the P6 radiator as it is known. But that leak rate has sort of increased as of late. So Sonny Williams and Aki Hoshide are going to go out there and deploy a spare radiator that has not been used since the early part of the station's life. But there is a spare radiator there that is going to be deployed, and they're sort of going to shunt those ammonia lines and reroute it through that spare radiator to see if that fixes the leak. So quite a bit of traffic going to and from the station. The Dragon's about to head home today. And then, of course, that spacewalk coming up on November 1st. We'll have live coverage of that spacewalk that we just talked about beginning at 6:15 a.m. Central Time on the 1st, 7:15 a.m. Eastern Time. The spacewalk itself is due to begin about an hour later at 7:15 a.m. Central Time. If you missed our briefing on Friday, where Mike Suffredini and Mike Lammers and Allison Bollinger talked about that spacewalk, you can always log on to the NASA website and also the NASA television YouTube channel, which is www.youtube.com/NASA television, and watch that briefing there and hear them describe the steps that Sonny and Aki are going to be taking later on this week.
You can normalize station ground 2.
Thanks, Kevin. We'll take care of it.
In addition to the 6 members